Welcome to part 2 of Photorec.tv's Q&A, the international version. If you haven't seen part 1, it's linked right down below and you can go watch that. We've got a pile of fantastic questions that you all submitted and we're going to jump into those right now.
So here's a question from Arturo Alvarez. Pros and cons on having a full frame lens on a crop sensor DSLR. I did this quite extensively when I had the 70D, particularly with the Tamron 24-70 and the 7200. Cons are certainly obviously that you have the crop factor, and these lenses were designed to work on a full frame DSLR. So particularly at the wide end, 24mm on an APS-C sensor is something like 36, 38. I'm not going to do the maths, but it's not really that wide. It's wide enough for a lot of scenarios, but as a walk around, you'd like something wider. Now, you do benefit from that extra reach in quotes. So sometimes if you're using a 7300 on an APS-C body, you've got that extra reach in wildlife, and that's really handy. Loads of wildlife photographers love using like a 300 prime on a 7D Mark II, and they get fantastic results. You also don't tend to get anything like vignetting on that sort of thing. Cons, I think, we've talked about this before, haven't we? It's going to be heavier, particularly. It's probably going to cost you a lot more. And I think it's kind of changing now. You didn't used to get any particularly great lenses that are designed for APS-C cameras, but that has really changed recently. There's lenses that are coming out now specifically designed for APS-C cameras. That Sigma range, the 18 to 35, the 50 to 100 f1.8s, incredible lenses, and it's certainly going to be a case of where full frame, whereas people used to think it was paramount, is not paramount now. Your lenses will still work, they'll still autofocus, the image quality out of them will still be fairly good without going too deep into the debate of different megapixels and stuff. But
right. Yep. There's some full frame lenses that matched up with an APS-C camera are not going to give you as good a results as a decent APS-C designed lens for an APS-C camera. But in general, that difference isn't enough that I get worried about it. It's more about the value, losing that wide end in a lot of cases, and just kind of carrying around a bigger, heavier piece of glass than you need. Interesting though, you mentioned the 18 to 35 and that 50 to 100. Those guys don't make any arguments for lighter though. Those two lenses are fantastic, but man, they are heavy lenses.
Yeah, heavy lenses.
Okay.
I think if it's something you plan to upgrade to full frame soon, perhaps go with the full frame lenses. If you don't, perhaps you don't really see the need, I'd go with those Sigmas.
Yep, sounds good. Merrick Strand wants to know what the best value for money Canon L lenses are. I got two that come to mind right away.
17 to 40?
Yep, that's one.
24 to 105?
Nope. 70 to 200 f4 in my opinion. The 24 to 105 is a decent walk around lens.
Decent value.
Decent value. Bought new, I wouldn't necessarily say, but there are so many used ones on the market because that's the kit for the 5D Mark III forever, and then when people upgrade, they sell them. So you can find great used 24 to 105s, and they're great. David McKay, that is his lens that is primarily on his camera, like 80% of the time, walking around in all of these amazing locations that they travel to. So yes, certainly. But that 17 to 40 is, you can find that for deals sometimes down around 500. I think it usually hovers around 600. And the 70 to 200 f4, the non-IS one. It is travel friendly. The colors and contrasts are excellent out of it. And you can also find that for about the same price. There aren't any others that pop into my head as great values.
No. I nearly bought that 17 to 40 a number of times. And in the end, I decided that I wanted f2.8, and so I got the Tamron 15 to 30. But a good friend of mine has a 5D Mark II, and the 17 to 40 is pretty much all he shoots landscapes with. He loves it, and it's really sharp, particularly for the price.
Yep. You're shooting a lot more events and people, and that f2.8 is important. So if you're doing a lot of that 17 to 40 might not be the best, but for landscapes, that is a fantastic value lens. Jane wants to know, is it image quality better to take an underexposed image in low light and then increase exposure through post-processing, or is it better to expose correctly for low light and minimally process in Lightroom. I can't seem to find data to support one way or the other, but it's a hard question to Google. Thanks. I think Dalibor wrote back to this person as well, and it nicely shared the term ISO invariance. And the answer depends. It depends on what camera you have. I get that video that I put out, I don't know, last year sometime, or maybe even early this spring, and it said for better quality photos, raise your ISO. It's a little bit of a kind of a link baity title, and it's also mostly directed at Canon, because that's Canon folks. We don't have a lot of room to really boost our shadows before we see noise, and so it's better to nail that exposure as close as possible right out of the camera. But Sony, Nikon, you can certainly underexpose and bring up those shadows, and you're going to have better results doing that. We're not talking drastic amounts, but that would be my preference, to slightly underexpose more than overexpose with those cameras.
Yep, I agree. I used to underexpose all the time with Canon stuff and push it, and I think sometimes with the Canon stuff, it's if you're shooting really, really high ISO, sometimes it's easier to just make sure you're going to keep everything, all the data there, and even slightly overexpose, and end up bringing it down slightly, because it can get a bit noisy. If you start boosting shadows and stuff, it's not great. But the Sonys in particular, as long as you get somewhere near it, I think you're gonna do kind of okay there.
Yep. Ursula's got a question. She's dreaming of getting the Sony A7R II, but she's disappointed to see how dirty the sensor on mine got. I've talked about that on multiple videos and in multiple mishmashes, and how quickly it got that dirty. In your opinion, could that be a deal breaker? The closest shop near her in her town that can clean a sensor is about 75 miles away. What's been my experience after Iceland, and have I figured out how to avoid this problem? So again, as I said, I talked about this multiple times. My Sony sensor in my A7R II gets very dirty very quickly. My issue, I believe, is, and I don't have any hard data to back this up, but it's the use of that cheaper ComLight adapter that I primarily use with my Sony. That introduces an extra gap. So now we've got two gaps in there, and it's not weather sealed, not even a tiny little bit. And I think that's the entry point for most of that dust and stuff. That said, I don't feel like it's a deal breaker. It can be annoying at times, but I haven't had it ruin any pictures either that I could fix. And if I'm good about rocket blowing before I go out on each major trip, and sometimes during the trip, I'm in pretty good shape. Plus, actually cleaning it with a little sensor swap kit that I talked about several videos ago, many videos ago, it's not that scary. It's not that big a deal.
Same. My A7 II, I was surprised how quickly that sensor got really dirty the first time I owned it. But to be honest, yeah, the rocket blower tends to get like 90% of anything off there. I've never really had anything on there that was chunky enough to show up in a picture, unless I was down at f22, yeah. And even then it was a speck that I could just literally just clone out in Lightroom.
I was horrified to realize that I forgot my rocket blower on the Cuba trip, and it wasn't an issue. The sensor did get dirty. I saw it in some longer exposures where I was shooting at f18 or f22, but those pictures were crummy anyway. It wasn't the dust stuff. So that's fine. So I don't think that should hold you back from getting it, and don't be scared.
Definitely not a deal breaker.
Yeah,
it's an inherent problem with mirrorless cameras, because the mirror just tends to protect the camera from dust a little bit. But as long as you keep it fairly clean, you try not to change lenses in particularly dusty areas, and you hold it down and just use a little blower underneath it, it'll be fine.
Yep. We'll see how I feel after I come back from Tanzania.
Yeah.
Tim wants to know, Tamron 24-70, which you own, Scott, or the Sigma 35mm art for portraits, landscape, street, general purpose. I know the zoom is more convenient, but I want the best picture/build quality I can get for $1,000. He's going to be putting this on the Nikon D750.
Purely because you've said portraits, I would get the Tamron, and I'll say why. It's that 35mm is not a particularly great focal length for portraits, and the reason I say that is not on creatively. Yeah, on a full frame sensor, it's because it it distorts people's facial features. You've got a video from that from how long ago? Crikey, that was really old. But in fact, we should link that on how different focal lengths affect facial features. It's not particularly flattering for people. It makes like noses bigger and stuff like that. The 35R is fantastic. It's a phenomenal lens. The 24-70 is a super convenient focal length. It's going to be great, particularly landscapes. You're going to have VC in there as well, so you can shoot at slow shutter speeds. Street, I don't know. Have you used the 35? I don't know how quick that thing is to focus.
It's quite good. It's as good as the 50 art. Yeah, this is tough. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Scott. I wouldn't stress too much about the distortion at 35 because it's pretty slight. You can certainly take portraits, but on full frame, it's getting a little more difficult, and I would choose to go to 50 or 70. And with the Tamron, 70 at f2.8 can give you a really nice portrait on the D750.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be quite as sharp. But I think I agree. Tamron 24-70 would be my pick as well.
Yeah. Oh, sharp. There's no comparison. The Sigma is miles better. Probably contrast colors. That overall image quality of that 35 is going to be way better than 24-70. But it's a prime, and you do largely get that with primes over zooms.
Yep. That's tough. It's tough. It's a tough choice. I don't know if we actually helped you, Tim. All right. Christian wants to know the right lighting age for field macro photography. Ring light, speed light, rigged on or off the hot shoe. Looking for something that doesn't break the bank but gives enough light to be able to do handheld macro photography, working with the Nikon D5500 and the Tokina 100mm macro lens. I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I think the Ring LED lights, and there's several on Amazon, would be your best option because that keeps that very even light from all sides. I mean, your other option is a little small handheld LED that you can try to move around, but you're always going to have to watch, and then that's becoming awkward because you've got two things. So I'd go for the ring light, and I'd go for one of the LED ones.
I've seen some products, and I think they're made by Yongnuo, as they're small flashes that fit on the end of your lens. That are triggered out of the hot shoe, and you can choose to light from just one side or the other. And I think the expensive ones support TTL, the non-expensive ones are manual flash exposure, but they do a really, really good job. You're able to get super close with them, and a lot of the issues sometimes people have with lighting, particularly when you're doing macros, because you're so close, is you end up with like a shadow from the flashlight. So you either have to get the flash off the camera, or you have to kind of bounce it somehow. So the flashes on the ends of the cameras, on the ends of your lenses, are really helpful.
Yeah.
I've never used one, so it's really difficult to say yes, this is absolutely what you want. But I think for handheld stuff,
for my experience with macro, I love the LEDs because for the same reason you talked about this in your LED versus or your continuous versus flash, you can see immediately what you're getting as you're focusing. It can help you focus as well. Whereas if you're using the flash, you got to take a picture each time. And if you are photographing some skittish bugs and stuff, this bright light that all of a sudden happens can be more jarring than this gradual glow as you bring your LED closer and closer.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to say.
It's going to be a short... Oh, go.
No, go ahead.
It's going to be a short, sweet answer because I already know what the answer is. But Christian also asks, best lenses for beginner astrophotography on the Nikon D5500.
And your answer?
Rokinon.
Yep. That Rokinon 14mm f2.8. It's a manual focus lens, but it's fantastic. I got a long video, talks a lot more about that.
Great video.
Aaron needs some advice on methods of picking and keeping photos after a shoot or an outing. So you go out, you shot 100 photos, maybe hundreds of photos, and you come back and you only got a few that are worthy of post-processing and printing, and a few more worth adding to the personal library. It's a good question that a lot of people are dealing with.
I think you just got to be a bit brutal sometimes with your shots. I like to import everything on a base preset, which has a kind of just quick, dirty level of sharpening, clarity, that kind of stuff. So I can see how a shot is looking semi-edited, Obviously, anything out of focus goes straight away. And then if I'm really inefficient with this, I should go through it and star the pictures and then get rid of anything that's 2 stars, 3 stars, and that. I don't. I go through, I look at every picture, I sort of go, do I like that? Do I not like that? Remove. Do I like that? Do I not like that? Remove. It's probably quite inefficient, but I quite like going through it that way. I think when you're editing 2,000-3,000 pictures, the star system and for flags may be really helpful for you.
Yeah, I like the star system, so I'll bring everything in. I'll go through, I'll star anything that looks like it's worth keeping, 1 star. Then I'll go back through those 1 stars, and I have a base preset that's applied, so there's, it's going to look better than a raw, untouched raw file when it's sitting there in front of me. Then I go through and I 2-star ones that look like they're good enough to work on and share out someplace, and then I share those. And then I shuffle everything off to the backup drive and move on. Yeah, it's tough. I think being brutal is true, and the thing that I struggle with is it worth my time to go through and say I want to delete these pictures. You can use the reject method because let's say I take the time to delete 100 pictures. How much space does that save me? It's really not that much. So I just shuttle them all off to the backup drive and move on. Space is cheap these days. I don't want to spend a lot of time stressing about whether I should have deleted those 100 or 200 pictures. The only thing where I do that usually is time lapses. If I've recorded 2,000 frames for a time lapse, I've created the time lapse, I don't ever feel like I need to go back and make any changes to individual frames, then I'll get rid of those. But for the most part, pictures, they stick around. Good?
Good. Here's a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
How do I shoot neons in a long exposure? It's always soft in a long exposure. It's always moving.
So I followed up with James a little bit because I was a little confused about the always moving. But I think, James, what's happening here is, I don't know if it's so much soft as it is just kind of blown out in that area. So I would try... Yeah, I would try shooting shorter exposures, underexposing these neons. Also, making sure you got a good. Let's go to the basics first, though, to make sure we've gotten. There's a lot of variables here. Make sure you're on a steady tripod. Make sure you're triggering the camera without shaking it. So either a wireless remote or using a 2-second timer. So after you push it, the camera waits 2 seconds before it takes a picture. If you've got mirror lockup available to you, enable that as well. And then try shooting an underexposed image and see if you get a more sharper. I think we're seeing just kind of a fuzz from an overexposure of that neon area.
Another option is to shoot the neons at the correct exposure on the tripod and then expose for the rest of the scene on the tripod and then blend them into an HDR.
Nice. Yep, that would be a good use of HDR. Very nice. All right. And David wants to know, hey, this is our last question, I think. When taking photos such as this, and he provided an example, maybe I'll throw it into this video, how do you prevent the sky from being neutral and blown out? So in case I don't get this picture up, it is a typical kind of landscape scene where you've got beautiful green trees and all, and the sky is just so bright that it's basically grayish white.
Well, there's a couple of different options. You could get you could get a graduated ND filter, which would lessen the exposure on that sky by however many stops of ND that you've decided to get. You could bracket the shot, so you could take 2 or 3 shots and then blend them in post or in HDR. Or you could expose for that sky and then bring up the shadows and do it that way in post.
Those are all great suggestions. I would say that I think this is a common misconception that you can just walk up to a scene and with one shot capture everything our eyes see. Like right now I'm looking out this window and I see a big beautiful green and kind of blue sky with puffy white clouds, and if I put my camera out there, if I captured the green, the sky is going to be blown out. If I capture the sky, the green is going to be very dark. So the best solution in one case would be your last suggestion of expose for the sky. But the other thing I want people to think about is that you don't always need to capture everything that your eye sees. Think about what your subject is, and if it's not the beauty of the sky, then don't necessarily worry that it's flat and gray. If you go and look at my Cuba pictures, there's lots of them where the sky is just blown out. But that wasn't the subject, and I tried to minimize, how much of the sky took up the frame. My subjects were the alleys and the streets in those cases. And so don't feel like it's a bad picture if you didn't get the sky as your eye saw it.
Yep. Just remember that the dynamic range in your eye is going to hugely surpass any camera that you have.
Yep, very true. All right. If you've watched to the end, thanks. If you liked this Q&A, if you've got suggestions for other answers, we had our answers, but I'd love to hear your answers for other people as well. You can leave them right down in the comments. And keep an eye out. Follow me on Instagram. Follow Scott on Instagram. Follow photorec.tv on Instagram. We'll put all those up there. And keep your eye out for future calls for more questions. We'll be doing these again because I enjoy this. Did you have fun, Scott?
It's good. It's good fun.
It's good fun. All right. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.
Bye.
Hello, and welcome to, should I say part one? We got such a nice smile there. Okay.
You got such a nice smile there.
I just looked down. It's the first time I looked down and you were sort of like smiling.
Fucking great.